Hi, welcome to Bleav in Clemson Football. I'm Will Vandervoort. Appreciate you guys being with us tonight. We got a big show lined up for you as we get you set for Clemson-Georgia. Alex just 11 days away. That's Alex Dodd, by the way, co-host as always, helping us out, as filling in sometimes. And
I do what I can.
And you do a great job, my friend. Tonight we got a big show, though. And so Gary Stokan, the president and CEO of the Chick-fil-A Bowl, is going to join us today to talk about Clemson-Georgia as they get ready for the Aflac Kickoff Game that will be Georgia versus Clemson. That's noon kickoff on August 31st. So we appreciate Gary. He's going to be on here in a few minutes and is going to join us. We got a big show lined up. We got after we get done talking to Gary, we're going to talk about our favorite Clemson-Georgia game. I know some of you guys out there probably have your favorite games as well. So if you want to comment, tell us which one is your favorite Georgia-Clemson game. When we get on, we'll talk about those as well. Also, the Tigers wrapped up fall camp this afternoon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what was going on over there today at the Allen Reese Football Complex for Clemson as they get set for the game now, as now all focus turns to the Bulldogs. So we're going to discuss that. Then we got a little bit, one of our sponsors, betonline.ag, had their they had a tweet this morning come out where they asked, or they showed their coaches more likely to get fired, kind of a bet, like you bet on it. Obviously, we got the odds of what they say Clemson Dabo Sweeney might be, and so it'd be interesting to see what they said about that. And then also we got college football win totals and things of that nature as well to go through if we have time. Also, CBS Sports took a little shot at Clemson football this weekend. So we could talk about that a little bit too. But right now, before we do anything, we want to say thanks to our sponsors. And it always starts with the good folks over there at betonline.ag. BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports this season, from Major League Baseball, obviously to NFL. That's about to start. Preseason games have already started, and then college football here this Saturday. So go on over to betonline.ag for all the latest news, scores, and props that are available to you for your favorite teams. You can get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, the player props, and odds on just about every sport that's out there. So head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag, or you can use your mobile device to get in on all the action as well. Again, that's betonline.ag, betonline, where the game starts. Also want to say thanks to our other sponsor, the Clemson Insider, the most complete coverage of all Clemson athletics and recruiting. Go give them a shot over there. Of course, as you can see, that is where I work. And so I appreciate Robert always helping us out here. As you can find us right now on the Clemson Insider Facebook page. We're also on the Clemson Insider YouTube page as well, doing our show as we come to you live every Tuesday night from now to the end of football season. So you'll be able to find us here. And so we appreciate you guys joining us as we're going to talk all things Clemson football from here until the end of football season. Hopefully that's not until late January when the Tigers wrap up a national championship. Wouldn't that be good to do, Alex?
That'd be a fun addition of the show. I'd feel a lot like 2014, 2015, a little bit of surprise in there. It'd be fun. I don't know if we're going to be there, but hopefully in January we'll be talking about the Tigers still.
Yeah. Hope we're still talking about Clemson. I tell you what, that's an interesting thing to talk about here, and I know you kind of, as we're waiting on Gary Stokan to join us here, and we hope everything's okay. I know he's supposed to join us. You know how technology is sometimes; it doesn't always go as planned, and we're live, so but we're going to hope to have Gary on here pretty soon. But talking of the college football playoff, Alex, it's going to be interesting this year with 12 teams and how they're doing it. And, I just kind of want to start here. What are the expectations for Clemson? What are the expectations of how many teams from those other conferences are going to be in there? Does the ACC get 2 teams? Does the Big 12 and the SEC just say, no, it's ours, and the rest of you, I'll give you one, and I'll give the other guy one, and the other guy one, and the rest of it's going to be our teams? What do you think?
Well, Will and I do another show called Off the Cuff with Alex and Will, and we were kind of talking about doing our playoff predictions this week. So I was breaking down my playoff predictions, and it is interesting to do it at the 12-team format. It's pretty fun. It's a lot easier, or a lot harder, when you're splitting hairs with those teams at the end. But I was kind of looking at the history of it, of the college football playoff rankings at the end of the season. And over the last 3 years, you've seen, with this current membership of the Big Ten and the SEC, you've seen more teams from those conferences be in that top 12 at the end of the year. And, as I'm looking at it, I really don't see as much of a chance that the Big 12 or the ACC get more than one team in.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, in the ACC's case, you're going to have a lot of teams kind of cannibalizing each other in that top tier, in that top 5 or 6, and kind of a similar thing that I think is going to happen in the Big 12. I think you've got too many teams that are competitive, but maybe aren't, in that elite echelon of teams in both those conferences that are going to be competing for those spots. Yeah, I think it's going to be a Big Ten and an SEC party, and the others are going to be lucky to get the invite. Thankfully for the Big 12 and the ACC, those conferences each get one team with an automatic qualifier, and the Group of 5 is going to get one as well. So there will at least be 3 other teams. They can't have more than 9 spots from the Big Ten and the SEC this year.
That's right. And the thing that's interesting to me, and like I said, we're going to have Chick-fil-A President Gary Stokan on to join us here in a minute, as they're trying to get on right now as we speak. But Alex, I like your point. But here's the thing where I have a difference, where I think the ACC can get 2 teams. I think it depends on who the 2 teams are.
Yep, absolutely.
I really believe that. I think if it's Clemson and Florida State, then I think Clemson, Florida State can get in. If it's Clemson and Miami, I think Clemson and Miami can get in. If it's Miami and Florida State, then I think you can see those 2 teams get in. So I think the ACC can get 2 teams in, but it's based on who it is. But if it's like Miami as the conference champion and then NC State's the runner-up, I don't think that's happening.
Well, just look back at recent history. When Pitt won the ACC, they were the only team from the ACC in the top 12 of the college football playoff poll.
That's
right.
And
they were like number 12. So having that brand power and that national respect is going to go a long way in this conversation. If you think that it's not, and that's just going to be about X's and O's and what happens on the field, then you haven't been paying attention to what's been happening in the college football playoff era. Respect, brand power, it all matters, especially when you've got humans in a room making a decision.
Because that's what college football, that's how you get a champion. It's based on respect and brand power, not actually what you do on the field.
It's always been that way, even in the bowl era. You still had to have respect and brand power to win a national championship, because it was still humans voting on it.
It is, and that's the unfortunate thing about it. And it's still, even though, look, you're never going to have a perfect system, but I think the way the FCS does it is the best way to do things, and they've done doing it for man since I was a kid. And they started, I think, in 1979 with the FCS playoffs. And, so people understand the NCAA does not recognize FBS national champions. So if you were to go to the NCAA and say, okay, NCAA national champions, major college football is not listed. They do not get a trophy from the NCAA. It's the only sport where the NCAA does not hand out a trophy for a champion. So you'll never go to Clemson and find an NCAA national championship trophy in football. It doesn't exist because the NCAA does not recognize it, never has. And so they started recognizing FCS in 1979 when they split up, when they went from what was then 1A, which is what Clemson is, and then 1AA, which is what Furman and teams like that are. And so the 1AA champion started to get recognized by the NCAA because the NCAA had a playoff that was sponsored by the NCAA. And so Furman has actually NCAA championship when they won the national championship back in the, I guess that would have been 1988. Yes, exactly. So where Clemson doesn't have that in its football facility. Now, Clemson has the coaches national championship trophy. They have the AP national championship trophy. They have
2 college football playoff.
They got 2 college football playoff national championship trophies. So you're still national champions and all that, but the NCAA has never recognized the playoff part. And the NCAA's playoff is more like suited to teams that actually earn to get in. It's based on if you win your conference championship and all this. It's not about whose brand is bigger and this. I mean, let's be honest.
You have automatic qualifiers from conferences, and then you have a few at-large selections that get added to that field.
Exactly.
But other than that, those 16 teams are teams that they earned it on the field week in and week out.
Correct. And so, last year, I still go back, and obviously we don't care anything about Florida State here. However, Florida State got hosed last year. And I'll be the first to say it. Florida State should have been in the college football playoff last year. They earned that right. They were an undefeated team. Alabama had no business being in the college football playoff last year. They had lost a game. They lost a game at home where Florida State went undefeated. And I hate the reason they say, well, Florida State didn't have their starting quarterback. I'm like, even more so why you should have rewarded them. They still found a way to go undefeated in a season where they didn't even have their starting quarterback the last 6 games of the season. And then in the championship, AC championship, they're playing with their third string quarterback. So, to beat Florida on the road with your third string quarterback, and then to go and win the AC championship game with your third string quarterback, you need to be rewarded for that, not punished. And Florida State was punished, and I thought it was lame, it was bad, and the thing that sucks is that's going to happen again.
Yeah, there's a precedent
for number 13, right? That's going to happen again. Yeah,
there's a precedent set. I mean, and it really does kind of work like a judicial body when you look at how the CFP committee works. So once you have the precedent out there that you can deny somebody based on an injury, a rule that was kind of inverted, that was in there to help a team if it had a situation like Clemson when it went to Notre Dame and Trevor Lawrence was out with COVID. That's what that rule was put in there for. But instead, you had that rule twisted to hurt Florida State. But now in the future, you're going to see that. So you better hope your starting quarterback doesn't get hurt if you're undefeated, because who's to say you can't fall from 8 to 13 or from 6 to 12, and then the AQs get in over you. And I think we're going to see it happen soon.
Yeah, by the way, let you know, Gary Stokan having some technical difficulties getting on. We apologize. He's trying to get on and join right now, but he's having some issues. Again, Alex, me and you were worried about our broadband getting on. It sounds like that's happening with the president. I
had to go turn off the PlayStation, make sure my phone wasn't connected to the Wi-Fi. So I know there are technical difficulties happen. We're going to get Gary on here. He's going to figure it out. We're excited to talk to him, but we still have plenty of stuff that we can talk about. That's why we have a backup plan. That's why we listed 10 topics in our rundown.
That's why we do it this way, And so let's kind of, we kind of talk about it now with the playoffs. And and listen, if you guys want to comment, leave a comment for me and Alex. We'll love to kind of get your thoughts on the college football playoff. And what do you think is going to happen right now? I believe the ACC will get 2 teams in if those teams are Clemson or Florida State or Miami. I think those 3 teams with the brand that Alex talked about was a very good point from Alex's point of view. Because of their brand, I think they would signify interest in the college football playoff, as we've seen with Clemson, where Clemson back in the day with Kelly Bryant, that wasn't the best Clemson team of all of its playoff teams, but they were a number 1 seed despite losing to Syracuse, which tells you Clemson's brand and what the country thinks about Clemson, right, Alex? I mean, that kind of tells you a little bit where Clemson is in the pecking order, where I believe, and I hate it's because Florida State had been down for so many years, I think that kind of hurt Florida State a little bit, where I think if Clemson was the team that was in that situation that Florida State was in, I think Clemson might have gotten in last year.
Well, yeah, I think it would have been the same case for Clemson, would have been the same case for Michigan, would have been the same case for Alabama, would have been the same case for Texas. Those teams that made it in the field, maybe not Texas, but for Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, I think that they would have got in.
Ohio State.
Same situation.
Ohio State gets in.
The teams that have been there, but I think, and Florida State had been there. It's just been a long time, and they had some really lean years in the in-between. But I think, that's what it really came down to. And if you think that's not going to happen in this 12-team playoff because we're adding more teams in, just look at it. Just look at the top 25 and try to pick some teams that you think are going to be in the college football playoff. Try to pick 12 with those automatic qualifiers, and you'll see how hard it is when you get down in the weeds of it and try to split hairs between these teams. It's not easy.
When you think about it, Alex, I think the Big 12 of the other 2 power conferences, the Big 12, I don't see any scenario where they ever get 2 teams in, because unless their champion is undefeated and in the top 4 already, and then maybe their second place team only has 1 loss, possibly maybe in that scenario, but I can't see any team in there where any 2 teams are actually going to be in the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think Jay has a good point here too, that Notre Dame could ruin the chances of a second ACC team. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the Big 12, man, you really got to have some strong non-conference wins, because just the brand power in that conference, top to bottom, they don't have the same brand power that the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC have. I mean, who are the biggest brands in the Big 12 that you think could carry that with 2 losses?
The biggest brand is Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
As far as a football, and that's not a huge brand.
I mean, maybe Colorado, they've won national championship, shared national championship.
Back when I was a teenager.
And they've got Neon Dion.
Back when I was a young teenager.
Brand exposure, maybe some brand exposure, but they're not going to be in that situation. But just thinking about teams that could have the brand power to carry that, comped to Clemson, Florida State, Miami, these teams in the ACC that have that, I don't think the Big 12 has that
now, let me throw this scenario out there. What if Clemson wins the ACC and goes undefeated? Florida State finishes second with 2 losses, one to Clemson, both to Clemson, both to Clemson. And then Miami has 1 loss, only losing to Florida State. Now that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Because those 3 teams, only Florida State plays Clemson and Florida State plays Miami. Clemson doesn't play Miami. So that's a possibility, right? So, this is something we could talk about in a few minutes on the other side. Right now, though, I want to introduce the president and CEO of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, Gary Stokan, joining us now as we talk about Clemson versus Georgia. Gary, thanks for joining us, man. I know you're busy, and I appreciate your time, and I know you probably had some issues with the Wi-Fi getting on, but we appreciate you finally getting on and joining us.
Yeah, I apologize to you and to everybody for being late, but it's that time of the year where we've got meetings going on. We just had Rich Clark in town, the CFP executive director, that came to the office to visit, talk a little bit about what's going to happen this year in the playoff, and had to take him back to the hotel. So I apologize for running a little bit late.
Hey, man, no need to apologize. That's a bigger fish on the line. You got to make sure he's happy at all sense. For you to just come on to Bleav in Clemson football with that going on, we appreciate you even more, buddy. So thanks for being here. Hey, look.
We had a good visit and talked a lot about, the playoff this year and, what we'll learn, and obviously have the opportunity to adjust things for next year. And then as we lead into the new contract in 26. So Rich is a great guy. Enjoyed spending time with him over the last month over media days, and just recently today at lunch and then at our office. And so looking forward to working with him and his team and putting on this new college football playoff this year in the quarterfinal.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and we're gonna kind of break that down a little bit here with you in a little bit. But I want to start off with this Georgia Clemson game. I know you're excited about it. You love having Georgia. You get them in the SEC championship game there, and you get them. At times you've had them in the national championship game. You've had them in the playoff game. First of all, now to get Clemson, who you haven't, you've hosted in this game in the Aflac Kickoff Game before. But you've been wanting to get them in the other game, in the Peach Bowl, for a long time, since the last time they played there against LSU. So how excited are you to have this matchup, Clemson versus Georgia, in Atlanta? You're going to have half the stadium orange, half the stadium red. I know you're going to be pretty stoked about it.
Well, it's really interesting. I go back to this rivalry when I was just out of coaching, and I had taken a job with Adidas in 1980. And I had Clemson and still have the cover of Sports Illustrated with Perry Tuttle running into the end zone in Adidas in the Orange Bowl when Clemson won the national championship. And then fast forward, I had Herschel the next year wearing Adidas as Georgia won the national championship game. So I go back to the early 80s with this rivalry, and then fast forward to meeting with Greg McGarity, who was AD at Georgia, and Dan Radakovich, who was AD at Clemson. And they had talked about, playing the game in 2021. And we had already had a matchup. I can't remember who it was, who we had in our kickoff game then. But they said, yeah, we wanted to play the game in Atlanta, but you had already a matchup set up. And so they played the game in Charlotte. And so I start talking about, well, let's redo the rivalry. And they said, well, we were talking about doing a home and home. I said, well, let's do the rivalry rubber match in Atlanta. And as we talked about what dates made sense for both programs and for us, an opening was available in 24. So they said, well, we'll come to Atlanta in 24, and then they'll play home and home in 25, 26. So that's how this game got hatched. And yeah, to your point, to have number 1 against number 15 and probably the 2 favorites to win their respective conferences in Georgia in the SEC and Clemson in the ACC is, a godsend. And I look at Clemson, they've been in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl more than any other team. And then we kind of started their dynasty back in 2013 when Catazano hit the field goal and Taj Boyd hit Hopkins on 4th and 16, and they beat a top 10 LSU, and they wound up the next year beating Georgia, top 10 SEC team, and the word Clemsoning went out of the dictionary.
Yeah, don't tell Dabo that name, that verb.
But that was kind of the start of the Clemson dynasty, that they went on to win 2 national championships. But we didn't see them and haven't seen them in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl since that game. So, yeah, to be good. I do think, ironically enough, that in this new playoff system with the in the 10th year of the 12-year contract, that the contracts that the ACC have with the Orange Bowl won't go into effect because the Orange Bowl will host the semi this year. But the SEC has a contract with the Sugar Bowl, as does the Big 12. And so the highest ranked champ in the SEC or Big 12 will probably go to the Sugar Bowl. The Big 10 still has a relationship with the Rose Bowl contractually. So the Big 10 champ will probably go to the Rose Bowl. And in that scenario, if we say Georgia is going to the Sugar Bowl ranked number 1, in that case, then the Fiesta and the Peach would be the 2 other quarterfinals. And I think they would probably put the Big 12 out in the Fiesta Bowl and probably the ACC in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So I told Dabo at ACC Media Days he wants to play in Atlanta 3 times this year. Once in the Aflac Kickoff Game, once in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl quarterfinal, and once in the national championship game. So, some of the Clemson people can take up residency in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'll say this real fast, and I'll let Alex, I know he wants a question to ask you. That means my boss will be happy because obviously it will be a little bit cheaper for us if we're having to cover this, the Chick-fil-A Bowl, and then the national championship game, in Atlanta. A little bit easier for us, being that's just a couple-hour drive, to Atlanta.
There you go.
Go ahead, Alex.
Visiting with Gary Stokan, the CEO and president of the Peach Bowl. Gary, just how exciting is this for you guys? You've hosted a ton of these games dating back to 2008, but to have the rivalry aspect and to have the regional aspect, just a definite sellout crowd and a ton of stuff going on around it from 2 fan bases that don't have to drive very far. How exciting is that for you guys to add that element?
Well, when you talk about, Clemson and Georgia, you got to mention Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. And these are 2 coaches that have won 4 out of the last 8 national championships. Both Clemson and Georgia have obviously, along with Alabama, probably, I would say, are the 3 teams that are probably the most prevalent in success over the last 10 to 12 years in college football. So to have 2 of them playing in our game and both be ranked top 15, both with top 10 defenses in the country. And, I think the key to the game is going to be the quarterback play. What quarterback can, handle the top 10 defense they're playing against, who makes the right calls, check downs, the right plays. What defense can possibly give the offense a short field or a turnover to allow them to score some points. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I think it's going to be a very interesting and tight game with, probably maybe a 55-45 split in the crowd, but a sold-out crowd with electric atmosphere on August 31st in the Aflac Kickoff Game.
Gary Stokan joining us here, President and CEO of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Gary, I wanted to ask you just your thoughts on Clemson. Me and you talked about it at ACC Media Days, kind of what you think this Clemson team is going to look like this year. Just give me your preview of them, and like you said, you talked to Coach Sweeney, and what's he told you, and what do you think this Clemson team is going to look like on August 31st?
Well, I think led by Carter on defense, their defense is going to be really, really strong. They return a lot of players there. To me, their key is going to be on the offense. The offensive line, which has a lot of experience, they lose their center, but they've got a lot of players back, which experience is always good to have. Particularly on the offensive line and depth as well. Their wide receivers, I think, are better this year. Moff is an excellent running back. To me, the whole key is the combination of Riley and Klubnik. How well in year 2, I think it is Riley's system going to be effective? How well is Cade Klubnik going to be able to make the transition from his first year to his second year with the new offensive coordinator? And instead of trying to do too much, so to speak, like he was able to do as a 5-star quarterback in high school, you've got to learn how to manage the game a little bit better, particularly against a Georgia defense that's going to be one of the finest in the country. So I think Dabo is the type of coach that likes kind of where they're at with respect to people not talking a whole lot about Clemson. And I think, with the experience they have coming back and, they're only a few plays away from being, a 10-win season last year. So, I think Clemson likes being under the radar right now. And on the Georgia side, I think, obviously Beck is, one of the guys up for the Heisman Trophy. They've got to fill in for some kids like McConkey and Brock Byers that provided them a lot of offense last year. They've got some good backups like Delp and some other kids. Their defense, obviously we talked about it's going to be very, very strong. So I think it sets up for a wonderful game, great matchup. But I think the key is, which is typical in college football now, is how well the quarterbacks can play against both those great defenses.
Visiting with Gary Stokan, the president CEO of the Peach Bowl. Gary, as far as this rivalry's come, there are a lot of Clemson fans and a lot of Georgia fans who are my age or younger that maybe don't know as much about this game. Thankfully, my dad raised me the right way, so I know. But how crazy is it that both of these teams come into the game with a similar feel, that they're going to want to establish a line of scrimmage, that they're going to want to play good defense? Kind of feels a lot like a 1980s style of football, despite as much as football has grown and evolved over the years.
Well, that's exactly right. You think back to our honorary captains for this game, A.J. Terrell from Atlanta, a great defensive player, and Kevin Butler from Georgia, great kicker who kicked the 60-yard field goal to beat Clemson in one of those big rivalry games in the 80s. So it could come down to special teams and a kick like that. I think the game is going to be that close. And as I said, not with a lot of scoring, but it's so exciting to have these type of games. If you think about before we created this kickoff game format, where we'd be talking about, Clemson maybe playing a directional school that probably wouldn't excite a lot of people, and the score would probably be, 35-0 at halftime, and sitting out in Death Valley and 90-degree temperature with 90-degree humidity. Here we're going to be in air conditioning at noon and having 2 top 15 teams, leaders in their conferences, great viewership, sold out atmosphere, excitement in the first game, passion. So we've changed the face of college football with this kickoff game format, and so happy and humbly proud to have both Clemson and Georgia playing in this year's game.
Gary, I need to ask, since you just mentioned it a second ago with Kevin Butler. By the way, bad omens there for Clemson. They do not like that name, obviously, from that Clemson was number 2. It was 1984 game. Clemson was number 2 in the country at the time. So maybe they get a little revenge, and since Georgia's number 1 and they kick a field goal to beat them. But I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite Clemson-Georgia memory? Is there a certain game that stood out to you in the years that you've watched? You mentioned when you were at Adidas and stuff like that. So you watched a lot of those games back when I call it the 11-year war from 1977 to 87, and those were some of the best games in college football at the time. What do you remember? What is your favorite game, I guess, from Clemson-Georgia in the rivalry?
I think there's moments, and, you're asking me to go way back now into the 80s in my memory, but things I do remember back then was I do remember, Tuttle and, I just got a blank.
Homer Jordan?
Back. Homer Jordan, how quick he was and how lightning he was, what he meant to that team, and how proud I was to have, the relationship with Adidas and Clemson there, and the success that they enjoyed. And then another memory was the Butler kick. But another memory was I remember Herschel Walker, who I had wearing Adidas, breaking his thumb and not being able to play in the first game of the year, which was the Clemson game.
1982 game, yeah.
That was a big story because he was supposed to have a huge year. And, I had him in Adidas, and Clemson was coming off the national championship game, and he couldn't play in that game. So those are a few of my memories of what an old man can still remember going back into the 80s.
Well, those are good memories. And that Clemson game, that 1982 game, the first time in college football history that a college football game was played on Labor Day night that night, and it was Clemson-Georgia. They both were coming off national championships, Georgia in 80, Clemson 81. So ABC wanted us kind of, knowing the rivalry and how the two fan bases don't like each other, and they wanted to play it up a little bit more, and they did, and it turned out to be a 13-7 game. Georgia won on a
first
block
time
punt.
under the lights at Sanford Stadium there
First time,
too.
exactly, on a block punt of all things. Georgia won the game from. So
I do remember everybody from Clemson telling me in every interview I've done this year that Herschel Walker, the only place he hasn't scored is in Death Valley.
Oh, the Clemson end zone. Even Stadium, he never scored on Clemson. So, that's one of the proud things Clemson always loves to brag about. That Herschel Walker scored on everybody but Clemson.
I know he was close to going to Clemson, if I remember correctly.
That is true. That was one, and that's another thing that makes this rivalry so good, right? Because you mentioned that, but Clemson and Georgia have always gone up against the same players in recruiting, and this game kind of plays to that. Herschel Walker, Clemson wanted Herschel Walker, and he was a finalist for them. Back in the day, it was Clemson. It came down to Clemson and Georgia for Steve Fuller, and Steve Fuller, of course, went to Clemson. And then you go on with that list. Homer Jordan, he's from Athens.
Right. Yeah.
And he came to Clemson, and Georgia wanted him as well. So that's what makes this rivalry so much fun and so interesting to watch. And I'm glad you guys are hosting this game to kind of kick it off again. And I would love to see these two guys play every year, to be honest. I'm a huge fan of the rivalry. I wanted to ask you, again, it's Gary Stokan, CEO and president of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, joining us here. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the college football playoff and how it's going to impact teams this year, especially now in this new realignment world that we're living in, Gary.
Yeah, I Bleav that college football is the second most favorite sport in this country, only behind the NFL. And I Bleav we're on the precipice of really taking a huge step forward in college football, primarily because of the new playoff system. When you look at the amount of broadcasting that all the networks are going to do for college football this year, they're all involved now, and that's going to lead to more promotion of college football. And because of the playoff, I think you'll see increased viewership of college football because you're going to have more teams, upwards of 40, maybe even 50 teams deep into November vying for those 12 slots to get into the playoff. And I think related to that as well, because of those teams are going to be involved later into the playoff, you'll see increased attendance in college football this year as well. So I think it's a great time for college football amongst all the things that are going on off the field. with the lawsuits and the realignment, et cetera, not NIL, transfer portal. I think the game itself on the field is going to see a whole new level of interest, both viewership-wise and attendance.
We're visiting here with Gary Stokan, of the CEO of the Peach Bowl and the president there also. Kind of looking back to the BCS era, you guys at the Peach Bowl were kind of on the outside looking in from those big-time games at the end of the season, not hosting the national championship. But you were able to essentially build Atlanta into a headquarters for college football, with the Peach Bowl being included in the playoff, obviously for the foreseeable future, with the College Football Hall of Fame moving to downtown Atlanta also. Kind of how do you see this shifting things on the national picture from a bowl perspective, with the bowls that are included in the playoff, but also those that aren't anymore? What would you do if you were on the outside looking in again at one of those smaller bowls?
Yeah, I think, if you go back to 1998 when I took the job, we were coming off the 96 Olympic Games, and Bob Costas had said, well, Atlanta's becoming the capital of college football because it was announced that we were getting the Super Bowl in 99 or 2000, I think. We had the Georgia Dome that was kind of new, and 92. And so I was president of the Atlanta Sports Council as well as the Peach Bowl at the time. And so I kind of said, okay, well, we want to be the sports capital of the world. And so we went out and got the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, NBA All-Star Game, NHL All-Star Game, the Super Bowl, the Final Four men's, Final Four women's, WrestleMania. So we went after everything, and we were getting them all because, based on the Olympic experience, the city, the government, the facilities, the airport, the volunteerism, the corporate support, everything was, working. All the ingredients made for a great recipe. And so we thought we became the sports capital of the world. And then as we transitioned to college football, I said, well, we were my first year, I think we took Georgia, who was borderline top 25, and Virginia, who was, I think, number 12 or 14. And our own newspaper wrote that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote, Georgia going to a third-tier bowl game, the Peach Bowl. So we were thought of in our own town as a third-tier bowl game. And so we endeavored to, make strides and make Atlanta the capital of college football. So we went after the Hall of Fame, moved it, built it, sustained it here in Atlanta. We didn't get into the BCS in 2006 when they went to host a national championship game and stayed with the Rose, the Sugar, the Orange, and the Fiesta Bowl, and double hosted model with those bowls hosting their game and then on a rotational basis hosting the national championship game. And the next year, the NCAA legislated a 12th game to the schedule. So I'm a competitive son of a gun. I went to my board and said, if they're not going to let us in the BCS on the backside, we're going to start the BCS on the front side. And so I called Terry Don Phillips, good friend at Clemson. Tommy Bowden was a good friend. And I said, hey, I'm starting this new event. Would love you guys to come open the season in Atlanta. It's a big recruiting base for you. We'll give you a big payout. Your fans, your big donors are here in Atlanta. Easy trip for a lot of your fans, and I'll give you a lot of tickets. And then I called Nick Saban, I had helped at LSU get into the Peach Bowl back in 2000. He had just taken the job at Alabama, went 7-6 his first year. People forget that. Lost to Louisiana Monroe and had to win his bowl game to go 7-6. And he said, Gary, you helped me out back then. I'll help you out. And we'd love to come to Atlanta. If we can win recruiting in Alabama and finish second to Georgia for recruits, we'll play for national championships at Alabama. And, we all know what happened. Alabama came in, won the game, was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Alabama's back. And Nick Saban would tell you that was the start of their dynasty in 2008 when they beat Clemson. And the next year, I had him back in the kickoff game, Chick-fil-A kickoff game, to play number 7 Virginia Tech with Frank Beamer. Alabama was number 5. Alabama wins that game, goes on to win the national championship. And on the roster, they had 19 kids from Georgia. So I framed the game up as the Daytona 500 of college football. We were going to start the BCS on the front side of the season. And, you know, we changed the face of college football, but I did get a cease and desist letter from Daytona 500 saying, please don't use Daytona 500. So I got a little bit of trouble there, but it's basically what we did. We changed the face of college football by having a bowl type atmosphere and a huge game on the front side of the season. ESPN, prior to that game, their ratings were terrible in the beginning of the season. Attendance really wasn't all that great at all the schools because people played, you know, easy win games. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this kickoff game was a win-win-win for everybody. A win for the ADs because the payouts were huge. A win for the fans because they got tickets. And if they didn't get tickets, they could stay at home and watch a great game, great matchup. Great for the coaches because they will tell you that you improve most from week 1 to week 2 because you have live film now. And if you have live film against a good opponent, individually and collectively as a team, you can coach your kids up better rather than playing a non-directional school that, you know, you're gonna easily beat that person head to head as well as a team. You don't learn very much, and coaches can't coach you up as much. And the players love it because at the end of the day, all players want to do, because they're so competitive, they want to compete at the highest level against the best competition on the biggest stage. And we gave a national TV broadcast in a sold-out atmosphere with a unique experience. And, you know, we've 17 years later, you know, here we are with Clemson-Georgia, number 1 and 15. So this will have a huge implication on, you know, obviously the seasons both teams have. And it's proved to be a very important data point for the CFP selection committee. I go back to 2017 when we had number 1 Alabama against number 3 Florida State in the greatest opener of all time. Alabama beats Florida State, doesn't win the SEC that year, but yet gets into the 4-team playoff because they had beaten Florida State and wound up winning the national championship that year. So this is a very important game in the eyes of the CFP selection committee because it gives you a differentiation point. If you win the game, obviously, and you have a successful season, it's going to help your resume. If you lose the game and you have a great season and the team you lose to has a very successful, great season, it only helps your resume. So there's not a lot of downside in playing in a game like this.
Gary, you mentioned it there, and we'll leave it with this. You talked about how the Alabama dynasty started with that win, but at the same time, it subsequently started the Clemson dynasty too, because halfway through that season, things weren't going good for Clemson, and they end up replacing Tommy Bowden with the guy now known as William Christopher Sweeney, Dabo Sweeney, as the head coach. And Clemson goes on to have the dynasty it had. And if you look at it in the history of college football, the 2 runs that Alabama went on with its 12-year run with Nick Saban, and then Dabo Sweeney with the 6-year run Clemson went on, those 2 runs are considered 2 of the greatest runs in the history of college football. And it all started with your game. It really did. I mean, you could actually, it's like a great book to say the greatest 2 dynasties of college football started in that one game, even though at the time it probably didn't appear that way when people were watching the game.
And I think if you're right, Will, if you add upon that, on top of that, the LSU game in 2013, you know, that was another impetus of Clemson going on and having their dynasty started in that game. So, yeah, we in Atlanta, whether it's the Peach Bowl or the kickoff game, have been very involved. I don't want to say instrumental, but very involved in being the host of both Alabama and Clemson's dynasties, no doubt about it.
Well, man, it's been great having you on here, man. Talking football, I could talk with you all day, dude. We did that. I did that to you though in Charlotte, ACC Media Days. I don't want to do that to you again. So we could talk all day football, man. I appreciate you, Gary, joining us, and look forward to seeing you here in a few weeks for that game. And hopefully, you guys will get the game that you want, and hopefully, we will too on our end. And it'll be good for everybody involved, right?
Well, we look forward to hosting you, and thanks so much for having us again. And thanks so much for what you do for college football. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate you, buddy. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks, man.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was Gary Stokan, the CEO and president of the Chick-fil-A Bowl in Atlanta. Alex, that was awesome, man. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better interview and to get the information. And to hear that story, the way he talked about getting Alabama to come play in the game, getting Clemson to come play in the game, and then it turns out two of the greatest dynasties ever come from that game. It's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gary's got a future in either college football analysis or as a sports writer, because that was a heck of a story. And I mean, if you look at it seriously at what Gary's done since we went to the Peach Bowl, he really has been an instrumental person, not just for the Peach Bowl, but for the city of Atlanta in turning it into, like he said, the capital of college football. And I don't know about you, but that College Football Hall of Fame museum,
it's awesome.
My dad and I went there before the Clemson-Georgia Tech game in Atlanta, the other kickoff game a couple years ago. And, man, this is an awesome experience, and they've done a great job there. And really, none of it would have been possible without the guests that we just had on the pod.
Absolutely, man. He is he put college football where it's supposed to be, in the South. And I'm sorry if anybody up north is out there and they're watching this.
All my Twitter followers are watching this. Well, I got a lot of Twitter followers. Football, my South Dakotans, Wyoming people, and my Coloradans are getting mad at me because of what you said.
College football is the South. I'm sorry. It is. It always has been. It always will be. It didn't start off that way, but the South quickly took it over. And it's been that way for, we could probably say going over 100 years now, or at least approaching 100 years.
You're not wrong.
Alex, I wanted to ask you, man, kind of playing off of that, because we asked him in that interview his favorite Clemson-Georgia game. So I'm going to go ours. So first I'm going to start with you. Then that way you can return it and ask me. So, Alex, what is your favorite memory of Clemson-Georgia?
Well, I can't go with an answer from before I was born. So if you know the history of the Clemson-Georgia series and when I was born, it doesn't give me very many options of games to choose. But I'm going to go that 2013 game. If you talk about defining moments in Clemson's kind of return to prominence and the dynasty that Dabo was able to build, it's hard to talk about that story without talking about that game. And I remember a few things that were, you know, when you're a kid and you go to a game, you remember things that maybe aren't necessarily related to what happened on the field. So I remember getting barked at by a Georgia fan who was probably my age when I was 13. And my family took exception with that, and I changed seats. I also remember, you know, just the feeling on the field after that game. And I still don't think I've seen more people on the field after a Clemson game than that game. And just the atmosphere in Clemson after the clock hit zero is a feeling that I'll never forget. It was obviously an awesome football game. Seeing Sammy Watkins streak down the sideline, I always remember that one. And, you know, obviously you're going to say something from the 80s, but again, that's not fair because it's before I was born. I've watched those games too, and those were great games, but I can't really say it's my memory if I wasn't alive for the game.
Yeah, when I think about the Clemson-Georgia games, you know, obviously I think about that 1977 to 87 game, and next week I'm going to have some Clemson people on next week to talk about some of those games, and I call it the 11-year war, and there's a reason for it. I think 9 of those 11 games were decided by a touchdown or less, and I want to say 8 of those were decided by 3 points or less, including one that was a tie. And a lot of people remember 1983 where Donald Ibweike attempted like a 58-yard field goal to try to win the game for Clemson and missed it. Georgia then, and it was in the last seconds of the game, there was like 3 seconds left. So Vince Dooley rolls he rolls old Kevin Butler out there to go try a 63-yard field goal to win the game. And the thing is, Alex, Butler had the distance on it. He just hooked it wide right. If that thing, he would have made a 63-yard field goal, beat Clemson that day. Danny Ford would have been madder than mad if that had happened, because Clemson had led 16-3 in that game, and Georgia came back and tied it. And then had a chance there, like I said, at the end to win the game. And so Danny Ford would have been mad after he just missed a 58-yard kick, and the other guy goes and nails a 63-yard. But it didn't happen. Unfortunately, it did happen to Clemson the next year, where Clemson lost in Athens to Georgia on the 60-yard field goal, which at the time was an NCAA record. But those are not my best memories of the rivalry. I got a lot.
Georgia kicking a game-winning field goal is not your best memory of the rivalry?
That is one of my worst memories, because my brother at the time, he loved to just pull against whoever I was pulling for. And my stepfather's a Clemson grad and class of 49. And so I grew up a big Clemson fan. And my brother Eric, he just loved to do the opposite just to get under my skin. And so he sat there and Butler made that field goal. He just made it even worse, as he's just saying, I can't believe he made it. Oh my gosh, what are you feeling like right now? How mad are you? I feel
like I don't want to talk for like a week. What do you mean?
I'm like, I just wanted to punch my brother at that point in time. He's my older brother. That's what older brothers do.
That's why you didn't punch him.
Right. So that's a horrible memory for me. My favorite memory, though, is 2 years later, also at Sanford Stadium, and Clemson plays Georgia. The week before, Clemson was upset by Virginia Tech in its season opener, and nobody and their mama gave Clemson an opportunity. Unranked Clemson coming in playing. I think Georgia was ranked in the top 15 or something. I think they were 14 or 13 or somewhere in that range coming into Athens. And, nobody gave them a chance to win that game. And that was one of the best football games to this day that I've ever seen. It was back and forth. There was big plays by Clemson in the running game on offense. There was big plays by Georgia with its passing game and its offense. Its running game. There was turnovers that led to touchdowns. There was special teams plays that led to scores. That game had everything, as both teams went back and forth. And then Clemson, desperately needing to stop in the fourth quarter, they're down 28-21. They get a turnover. They're able to turn it into a touchdown to tie the game, and it's 28-28. Georgia gets the ball back. They can't do anything. Then Clemson gets it. They can't do anything. So Georgia gets it. Everybody's thinking, oh, Georgia's going to get a chance to win the game. Georgia turns the football over around midfield. Clemson gets it, and then it sets up what I think is the greatest moment for Clemson in the series. Now, some people may argue 1977 game when Clemson won 7-6 and they batted down a 2-point conversion in the rain to upset the Bulldogs that day in Athens. But to me, it's 1986 game, because David Treadwell comes on and makes a 49-yard field goal as time expires and starts this huge celebration. And Clemson wins what is, I thought, one of the best games I've ever seen, 31-28. There were a couple turnovers, but it was relatively a clean game for the most part. And both teams they gave it their all. The next year, they play in Clemson, and Clemson wins at 21-20. Another come-from-behind win. Treadwell makes a field goal with 2 seconds to go to win the game that year. And that was a shorter kick. It wasn't as dramatic as a 49-yard field goal, which, by the way, was the longest in David Treadwell's career. He became known as Mr. Clutch. I'm sure all the Clemson people out there remember that. And so, without a doubt, that's my favorite memory, man. I'll never forget that game. I remember my older sister, she came down to visit, and she says, I don't know why you're watching this. Clemson don't have a prayer to win this game. And she's a Clemson fan, but she sat there and watched it, and me and her watched that game, and she was just like, up screaming and couldn't believe it. And it was fun because I got to enjoy it with my sister, who thought Clemson was going to lose when we turned on the TV that day.
Well, the other reason I love that 2013 game so much is because it was my first in-person taste of the rivalry. I mentioned to Gary, it's like I grew up hearing about Clemson-Georgia and how big of a deal it was from my dad. My grandparents had the Jim Phillips record of Clemson's greatest games that you listen to on the record player. I'd sit by the record player and listen to him talking about those Clemson-Georgia games in the 80s. So I knew about Clemson-Georgia, but I didn't know Clemson-Georgia until I went to that game and it's something that I'll never forget. I've lectured Clemson fan after Clemson fan my age about how important this rivalry is and how it really is, just good old fashioned hate between two passionate fan bases.
Georgia Tech, it is.
yeah. I don't know if you can call your game good old fashioned hate if you've lost like every game in the series.
And most of the state doesn't even know.
And
but for you,
doesn't even know 3 players on your roster. No offense, Brent Key and.
Well, I mean, outside of Atlanta, the state of Georgia is Georgia fans. I know that because I lived there. I lived in South Georgia, and I lived there for 3 years covering high school football down there. And in my 3 years living in South Georgia, I met one Georgia Tech fan, and he's a guy that worked on the radio network with me with the high school, one of the high schools I covered, and that's the only reason I do him, Mr. Adams. If he's still around, I talk about you all the time in that sense. But he's the only Georgia Tech fan I knew in South Georgia. So most of the state is Georgia Bulldogs. I would say probably 90% of the state is Georgia fans. Probably another 7 or 8% are Florida fans, and then the rest are, Georgia Tech fans is what I always say. Look.
Well, I think too is like you got to give Dan Radakovich credit. For doing whatever he could do to bring this game back, right? No matter
absolutely.
in a neutral site or whatever. I know, it's great that it's being played. They could play it on Pluto and I'll get excited about it, right? Because it's Clemson-Georgia. But excited in the future to see it return to Death Valley and return to Sanford Stadium so that more people can have that experience that I had. You get one experience playing it in Atlanta and playing it in Charlotte. But it takes on different beasts when it's at the home fields. But again, just excited to have the game back.
Agree. The thing I love about this rivalry, you mentioned it, and I know, and look, I know she's probably not listening out there, and she's a great former Clemson player and has her own podcast and has a lot of success with it. And I love you, Kelly. I do, Kelly Gramlich. But Kelly, you once told me that you didn't think Clemson-Georgia was a rivalry, and that's because you come from Texas and you don't understand it. And, Clemson-Georgia is a strong rivalry, and they're 70 miles apart. Actually, probably right at if I had to guess, the number is like 73 miles between Clemson and Athens. And if you're driving it, it's about a 90-minute drive at the most. And it is the fan bases don't like each other. They recruit against the same players. Like Clemson and Georgia are always finalists for the same guys. It's either the guy's going to go to Clemson, but Georgia was his runner-up, or he goes to Georgia and Clemson was his runner-up. That's been happening for decades. It really has. And that's what Nick Saban meant by, because he knew he needed to get those Georgia guys and be number 2 in there. Now, I think when Dabo came along, Alabama pushed a little bit out of Georgia and out of Atlanta, because Clemson went back in and got to a place it belongs, because Clemson has always been right there with Georgia in recruiting the Atlanta metro area and getting those players. And now Clemson gets those players more so than Alabama gets. And Georgia, of course, gets the most. But Georgia would like to keep them all. And, so, that's where the rivalry is that's where it's embedded. And being that it's 70 miles apart, look, that's closer than Athens is to Atlanta. That's closer than Clemson is to South Carolina and Columbia. And I know people out there love to beat the Gamecocks, and that is Clemson's arch rival, and no doubt about it. But Georgia is South Carolina's 1A, Georgia's 1B in a Clemson fan's eyes. And it always will be the case. And I just hope it's a good game this year, and it gets back to that style that we're used to where, it doesn't matter what the rankings are or who's supposed to win, that we get a classic Clemson-Georgia football game. 13 of the last 20 meetings, that's going all the way back to 1977, 13 of the last 20 meetings have been decided by a touchdown or less. This has generally been a close game. It's generally been a very physical football game. And the team who wins it generally goes on to have a great year. Yeah. So, if you're a Clemson fan, you want to win this game. I know a lot of people out there, a lot of Clemson people not believing that maybe Clemson can win this game. But if Clemson can win it, it could spark a great season for the Tigers. And they still might have a great season regardless. But if they win it, they're definitely going to have a great season.
Yeah, absolutely. The best part about Clemson having Dabo Swinney in the locker room is he knows that history. He knows what Clemson-Georgia means. And it's also good for Dabo, like Gary mentioned, that he gets to kind of load up the Roy bus and play the nobody cares about us card again in this rivalry. Is going to help him out a lot too, I think. So I'm hoping we get one of those classic matchups. Honestly, with the way that these two defenses and these two football teams are built, it's hard for me not. It's just hard for me to see it being a 14-point game. It's really, it might. I'm not saying Clemson's going to win the game. I'm not saying that Clemson's going to control the pace of the game at any point. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying with the style of these two football teams and the way that this game's been played historically, it's really hard for me to see this being a 2-touchdown game.
And we're going to kind of get out of here and just kind of leave it one note talking about this game and what it means. Clemson wrapped up fall practice today, and they wrap it up the last couple of their last couple periods of their practice was wrapped up with the song Georgia Fight Song blaring at a very high optic level outside the facility.
High enough where you could hear it from your house? Or
Yes, high enough you could hear it here in Seneca. So they were playing at a high level as Dabo's getting ready to say, hey, look, this ain't a home game for the Tigers. This is a home game for Georgia, and we're going to play it as a road game. And so Clemson's already set. Dabo's got the mentality going. It's Clemson-Georgia week already in Tiger Town. So with that, we'll leave you guys next week. It will officially be Clemson-Georgia week. We will be getting you ready for the game. We got a couple people that I'm lining up to try to get on that are going to talk about Clemson-Georgia, the rivalry, what it means to them, what it means to you, what it means to all of us out there. Until then, Alex Dodd, thank you so much for being here. We want to thank Gary Stokan, the president and CEO of the Chick-fil-A Bowl as well. For those two guys, I'm Will Vandervoort. We'll talk to you next time on Bleav in Clemson Football.